In this video, I will again challenge kind of a maxim of American society, right? In this case, the maxim I wish to challenge is the idea that people shouldn't sue for defamation of character, or, especially, they shouldn't sue the widow, right, of somebody like Chris Kyle. Right. So Chris Kyle, I'll just give a background of this sample case. Chris Kyle said some very nasty things about Jesse Ventura, who was the former governor of Minnesota and a U.S. Navy SEAL. He said that Jesse Ventura was bad-mouthing the troops, saying that, we could afford to lose a few, right? That Jesse Ventura, then got in a fight with Chris Kyle, right? And Chris Kyle beat up Jesse Ventura in the fight, right? So Chris Kyle then went on the major news networks and proclaimed this message, right? Proclaimed as absolute truth that this was what happened between him and Jesse Ventura, right? And got a lot of media publicity for doing so. And Jesse Ventura maintains that this never happened. He was never beat up by Chris Kyle. He has many people who can help prove it, right? Jesse was very upset with what Chris Kyle said about him. Now, Jesse confesses that he wasn't in support of the Iraq War, but that he never said that we could afford to lose a few, right? And thus Chris Kyle irreparably harmed Jesse Ventura's reputation. Now, that being said, I think that Jesse Ventura was still willing to accept, after Chris Kyle's death, a recantation from his wife. If his wife would come up and say, I'm sorry, my husband lied, this actually never happened, Jesse Ventura was right, I think Jesse Ventura was willing to let it drop. But no, she maintained that her husband was telling the truth. So this is why people go to court, to maintain their reputation, to preserve their reputation. Right? If I say I'm a teacher and a student goes on record saying I sexually assaulted her, right? She's angry about the grade that she got in my class, so she decides that she's going to file a complaint to say that I was sexually harassing her, right? Maybe not assaulting her, just harassing her. I was making unwanted advances upon her. I was, maybe I told her, supposedly, that if she had sex with me, I would give her the A that she wanted rather than the C that she was going to otherwise obtain. But she was pissed off, right? In other words, she's pissed off at me, and so she decides to assassinate my character. Well, at this point, it is very important for me to be able to defend my reputation. She lied about me, right? In her illustration, she claimed something that wasn't true, that she knew wasn't true, or at least had a very good reason to believe wasn't true. In this case, I think she absolutely knew it wasn't true because she entirely made it up, right, in order to get back at me for the grade that I gave her, that she didn't want. I should have a right to sue her, right, to sue her for loss of reputation, right? And if by some way or another she died beforehand, and her parents were willing to recant and say, my daughter confesses it was a lie, that she was, seeking a good grade, I actually might let it drop at that point. I don't know. Or even donate the money I would receive to charity, right, if I were to continue with the suit. But the key here is that we must have a society that punishes people who willfully lie. Because if we don't have that society, we cannot establish what is truth. We cannot even come close to establishing what is truth, and we can hear all kinds of absurd stories. Somebody can say, Obama eats babies for dinner, right? Well, guess what? Unless they're saying it as an illustrative point, like, Republicans must think that Obama eats babies for dinner as satire, right? But when you go on, for instance, a major news network, when you're being very assertive, that you're not joking around or engaging in satirical exercise, right? When it's clear that this is, a point you're trying to make as a valid, legitimate point. And you literally do go and say a news network and you say, yes, Obama has eaten little babies. He has them for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, actually, right? I'm perfectly serious. I was at the White House and I saw Obama eat babies for dinner. Literally. I'm not joking. He had a cooked infant, right? If you were to actually go on a news network and say that, that's blatant assassination of character if it's not true. And you should be able to sue the person, right? Even if it's a public figure like, Obama, he should be able to sue the person who told that lie, right? It was a personal assassination of character, right? And it showed a blatant disregard for the truth. So let's look at actually the flip side of what happens if somebody like Mr. Ventura wouldn't sue Chris Kyle or Chris Kyle's estate, right? What would happen, right, is that there could be a question. Is Jesse Ventura, did he actually, maybe actually say, oh, the Navy SEALs can afford to lose a few, and did he actually, get beat up by Chris Kyle and so forth and so on, right? There could be a question that lingers in people's minds. And so the lawsuit is a public way to be declared by a jury as innocent, right, of the charges, right? You're going to court to clear your name, right? Now maybe you get some monetary award as well, and you can certainly punish those who defamated your character. But in the case of Jesse Ventura, I don't think he's actually accepting any money. And now, of course, the media is spinning that because they don't like Jesse Ventura, because Jesse Ventura actually has liberal principles that don't go well with the corporate capitalist order that runs our country. But see, to me, reputation is very important. And so when somebody, does challenge your reputation, they're challenging a very important part of you, right? And people have a right, or should have a right, to clear their name. Let's use actually another example, one final example that I think is a really great illustrative point. Alex Jones, right, has pretty much, and he's not the only one, there's others as well. There are people who have pretty much blatantly, publicly said that Larry Silverstein was involved in 9/11. That Larry Silverstein was part of a conspiracy, a massive insurance fraud conspiracy, right? He helped to bring down, right, the North and South Towers in Building 7. He was not there, of course, in the buildings the day that they collapsed because he had a doctor's appointment, right? But almost every other day he would have been. The argument is that more likely than not, Larry Silverstein was involved in a conspiracy on 9/11, right, for the World Trade Center towers. That's the argument that's being made. But the way that it sometimes gets made is actually that there's very, very clear proof, right, that Larry Silverstein was involved, right, in 9/11. I think that this is also dangerous, because here's the thing. If Larry Silverstein was not involved in 9/11, he should sue Alex Jones. He should sue, for blatant disregard of the truth, to clear his name, right? To say, look, this is absurd. I was not involved in 9/11. And it should be a major media trial, a major, media sensation, where you actually have a jury that decides whether more likely than not Larry Silverstein actually did engage in the conspiracy on 9/11, right? But see, we're not going to have that, right? And Silverstein, I don't think, ever has any desire to sue, right? But this always then raises the question, right? Was he involved? Was he not involved, right? And so the key is that maybe if we have more people who would be willing to sue, right, what you would get are more truth, right? Because people would have a greater degree of carefulness before they say something that they don't have any understanding about, right? They would actually watch their words, and they certainly wouldn't make assertions, right, where they would say, I know and can prove that Larry Silverstein was involved in 9/11, right? They might say, I think it's very suspicious. Let me point out to you some of the things that I find suspicious about Larry Silverstein's behavior in 9/11. That would still be acceptable, because you're not making an accusation. You're simply engaging in kind of a conversation, right? Where you say, this is really bizarre. And I agree, it's very bizarre, right? I think that we can all establish, I think any court in the country could establish that Larry Silverstein on 9/11 was very bizarre. And the fact that he wasn't in the buildings, the fact that he made so much money when the buildings collapsed, right, from the insurance policy, the fact that he bought the buildings for this like 99-year lease from the Port Authority, and, you know, they weren't worth much unless they actually were destroyed. But anyway, the point here is that if Larry Silverstein is innocent, he should be very furious, just like Jesse Ventura, and he should go and sue. And it should be a sensation, right? A great sensational trial, right? You know, Alex Jones on trial from, you know, Larry Silverstein for defamation of character because Jones said that Silverstein committed 9/11 or was involved in 9/11, right? And I believe that Jones pretty much has come out and said that, right? Has But if Silverstein threatened to sue, like, I think this is another thing where you should have more people who can threaten to sue. So Silverstein could send Jones a letter and say, you need to go on your program and make it clear that you are not accusing me of committing 9/11. And if then Jones said, oh, I actually am accusing you of committing 9/11. I'm accusing you, Silverstein, right? I'm not saying that it's simply suspicious, but I'm actually blatantly accusing you. Then I think that it's absolutely acceptable to sue. And sometimes Jones does that. Jones makes blatant assertions, right? He'll say, like, this is what happened. And I don't follow Jones's arguments all the time. I mean, sometimes I find them interesting arguments. I mean, I think that they're fascinating, right? But I don't find them by any means to be truthful, right? I mean, in terms of absolutely truthful. So the challenge here is that if you can sue for a situation in which someone defamates your character, it can better help you to preserve your integrity and your name and your reputation within the societal contexts. And so maybe we should have more people who are able and willing to actually engage in lawsuits, or at least threaten lawsuits, when somebody seems to challenge their character. All right, this is all, hopefully all makes sense, right? Because once again, going back to just my example, right, if some student accused me of something like sexual misconduct, where it's, or accused me of saying, engaging in blatant favoritism in the class, right? Made it very clear, like, that I allowed certain students, that I curbed their grades and not other students' grades, or something like that, right? Maybe nothing quite as profound as sexual misconduct, but the idea that I, gave some student an A who deserved a C, but then didn't give some other student an A, who deserved a C, right? Again, I could still go and potentially sue the student if the student wouldn't recant. Right, especially if there's a situation where the student's blatantly making an assertion, like to the dean, right? It's one thing for a student on a Facebook account to say, like, I think that Professor Raker is an asshole who, engages in grade discrimination. But when you're making an assertion, right, when you're actually asserting it, that's where the big issue comes. It's one thing to say, I have suspicions, or, I'm kind of angry right now at this person. It's another thing when you actually blatantly assert something. If you blatantly assert again, Obama eats babies, right? That is, to me, lawsuit worthy. If Obama wants to say, no, I don't eat babies, right? You're asserting I do. Let's go to court and have a jury decide. Do I eat babies? What's the evidence that I eat babies? What's the evidence that I don't eat babies? What proof can you provide? Real proof, that I actually do eat babies, right? I think that that's what you need to be able to create. And if you don't do that, you create a society in which people make all kinds of assertions without proof, and there's no way to determine the truth. Right? There's no way to get at the truth. Now, of course, if you go to court, it doesn't mean that the jury is necessarily going to be, to arrive at the truth. But if you have an impartial jury, or you have a jury of, that's selected in a random way, right? We're not talking maybe here about runaway jury, like the John Grisham novel, right, where the jury's very carefully selected kind of thing. But if you have a legitimate jury, the hope is that they arrive at truth, that they can establish, okay, A, were the statements involved truthful, right? And if they, if they're not truthful, was this a kind of a blatant disregard for the truth here, right? And I think that, if you make statements like Silverstein committed 9/11, right, and I can prove it, so to speak, that kind of argument, if you make that kind of an assertive argument on your radio program, I think that Silverstein almost has an obligation, to sue Jones if Jones won't recant. And that a failure to sue Jones would actually more greatly imply guilt, right? So, and again, I don't know if Silverstein was involved in 9/11. I do find it suspicious, but I don't know that. I mean, so I'm not going to assert that Silverstein was involved in 9/11 because that would be wrong. All right, it would be, I think, suing worthy. Right. So I think, again, once more, you have to be careful about the words that you say, careful about the arguments that you make. And as a final point, I'm not 100% certain that Ventura would drop his suit against Chris Kyle's estate if Chris Kyle's widow would publicly declare that her husband was lying. I'm not sure of that, but I think that's the way it was. You'd have to research that a little bit more. But again, I'm trying to preserve Ventura's reputation, right? And I'm pretty sure, right? I think it's safe to say that what Ventura is doing by this case is trying to clear his name. He's trying to say, look, I was slandered, not just slandered, but slandered, of course, something that was said about me that wasn't true, that was asserted as being true by the person who said it, right? And now I need to go to court so that a jury can decide who was telling the truth, right? And I am confident, I think Ventura thinks that I will win, right? That it will be established that Chris Kyle's statements were false, right? That he made this story up. And obviously that shows a blatant disregard for the truth, right? And therefore I should have a right to money. And I'm pretty sure that Ventura won't actually accept the money. I mean, or not for his own personal benefit, right? That maybe it'll be donated to charity or something. But the goal is a punitive aspect, to punish Chris Kyle and the estate for, that blatant disregard for the truth, right? And of course the slander, which at least, Ventura argues is slander, right? Because Ventura is saying, look, my reputation is very important, and you just slandered my reputation. I'm going to go after you in court because what you said about me was a lie, right? And I think that's acceptable. I think if Ventura could ever become president of the United States and somebody would go and say, Ventura eats babies for breakfast, then Ventura should be able to sue that person too, right? And once more, the fact that people don't sue, right, is what creates, I think, this question all the time about what is the truth? Is this person really that evil, awful person, right? So hopefully I've successfully challenged again this idea that you don't be suing for defamation of character and slander or libel. In this case it was slander because it was verbally spoken. I think that we should sue. I think that we need actually more lawsuits, and then maybe people will become more salient of the type of things that they assert, so that they don't make assertions that they can't prove that kind of irreparably hurt other people's reputation. Right? Thanks.